And then a special thanks to our sponsor today from Farmers National. Scott, do you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
Scott Dean. I am a farm manager and real estate with Farmers National.
Okay, so this is kind of a basic overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Again, part one is just really going to cover those current trends, what's going on, what we see. Now, I will say these numbers are from 2025 because Jim's currently collecting the 2026 numbers. The prelims usually come out like end of February, mid-March, usually mid-March, and then the final will come out in June. So, but we'll go over that. And then part two is kind of leases and different provisions. So this is one I'll say out in North Platte I've seen several times that have not been included, but maybe should be. Things like drought, hail. I was like, and fire, especially again, if you have cattle, right? Who's watching them, who's moving them. And then some critical financial considerations. So again, first part, we're really going to just talk about what's going on. Land value and rental rates shown and discussed are pulled from our Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report. And that is a statewide report that's been done since I want to say 1978. So a long time. It's based on old NAS statistics districts. I don't know how many of y'all remember that or not, but the reason they continue with that is so that they can compare apples to apples, because there's a very long index at the end of that if you want to compare historical values over time. So, oh yeah, see, this is what I just talked about. So again, those preliminary results come out mid-March. The other thing I would say is, how many of y'all have looked at the USDA NAS or National Ag Statistics Service, their cash rent rates they do every other year? I don't know if they do they break those down by county. So they survey producers like yourselves, right? Or landowners. Whereas I will say the Nebraska one surveys people like Scott. So people who deal with large, like multiple farms or ranches. So lots of land. So again, it's just a difference on where they get the information from. But the other thing I say is ours is kind of averages of averages, because we're asking him, what's the average in Perkins County? Like, and like maybe you have, I don't know if I'm making up numbers, Scott, so I'm gonna pick on you this whole time. I was like, prepare yourself. But like you have 5 or 10 farms, so you're gonna do the average of what that area is. Things like that. So these are those NAS statistics districts I told you about. So, right, Dawson County is here, Custer, Perkins is over here. We are in Perkins, so we're right here. I hope we're in Perkins or I'm in the wrong county today, and I could be very confused. It wouldn't take much to be fair. I was like, but Lincoln is where I'm usually located. But I do cover a 25 county area, so I go basically this entire square is mine to cover for the state. But yeah, so if you have anybody have land outside the Southwest pockets, what I'm going to ask, because again, I like to try and focus in on.
Except we're in Phelps County.
Well, that's true. Okay. So now I have to look at the map and figure out where it is. Oh, okay. There we go. So I just want to make sure we hit what you guys need. So do you have pasture land as well or just crop? Okay. All right. So this is the Nebraska ag land value for like all ag land value for the state. It was $3,935 an acre. It's down 2%. For the Southwest, you can see it was $2,045 an acre, down 1%, and the South, $4,998 an acre, down 1%. And again, I would take that with a grain of salt unless it comes out this year that land has continued to decrease in value. It could just be there are new people being surveyed or evaluated. It could be we have fewer. I'm going to tell you again, take that with a grain of salt. So, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah.
No, you're fine. Do you have any land that's outside of the Southwest District or the South?
South
Roscoe? Okay. I just want to make sure we're covering what you need. So, but that's again, all land values, and that includes both crop and pasture. So we also like to talk about this. So historically, corn prices and land values go together, which again, if you've bought cropland in the last few years, you kind of know that. It's changed a little bit in the last probably a decade or so, but in general, the values, if you look at them, they follow each other for the most part. There are some exceptions, but so this is the 10-year treasury bond, and what this really is looking at interest rates, right? So think of how interest rates affect whether or not we can buy land. Interest rates in the last few years have done what? Gone up. Uh-oh. It's like,
You're fine.
nope. Okay. It's like, but so interest rates have gone up, which makes it a little bit more expensive to buy land, especially if we're looking at, you know, 160 to, I don't know. I've seen some people that buy large plots of land. So, especially if they're doing those 1031 exchanges. So it depends. But again, that interest rate makes a huge difference. So I know they've come down a little bit in the last quarter, but we got spoiled for about 20 years, with 2 to 4% interest. It made it a lot easier, made it a little easier to operate. So I really like this one. I think it's a fun one to talk about, but I'm also a nerd. So I was like, I'm going to say this. I do think it's always interesting. I find generally the current livestock prices and the current crop prices, if we had looked at this 2 years ago, they were the opposite, right? Think about where cattle prices were 3 years ago, right? So it was flip-flopped versus now. What were you saying? It was like 492-pound calves that were selling for 605? It's like,
A little over 3 grand.
I remember when I was a kid and they were selling for like 60 to 80 cents. But I'm from Florida, so they have a negative basis there. But I'm just saying, I remember when they were under $1 a pound. So yeah, so you can see that, and again, this is from realtors, my brain died. Farm managers, appraisers, bankers are also included in this survey a lot. Kind of what their views are on it. So as you can see right now, they think livestock is having a positive effect, which when you see the prices for the general regions, that seems to be true. Purchase for farm expansion also can have a positive effect on it, is what they're thinking. And then those 1031 exchanges. I don't know if anybody, have y'all heard of the 1031 exchange? You know what that is? So, okay. So those also can potentially have a positive effect. For a while there, I felt like we were having a lot of people moving in from Colorado that were selling off their farms and ranches and buying over here. So I heard a lot about that. So just depending on the situation. The non-farm investor interest in land purchases has gone up considerably in the last few years. It used to be a lot lower, but again, some interesting things to look at. And then obviously, as kind of again, the last few years, those farm input costs have gone up, and then the expectation for current crop prices are having a negative effect on it. So these are just the fertilizer trends. I tend to probably focus more on this 5 year, but you can look at again what happened in 25. They were pretty steady throughout most of the year, and then kind of towards the end went up a little bit. But yeah, so I think these are pretty interesting. Again, I think when you're thinking about long-term purchases and stuff, how much are your inputs? What is your margin that you're dealing with, right? So depending on what you're growing and what you're selling makes a lot of difference. So this is the 10th district. This is average interest rates historically over time, looking at operating versus intermediate versus real estate. So again, they follow each other historically. And these follow pretty closely, as you can see. All right, so cash rental rates. Again, we'll talk mostly about the Southwest, the South, and the Central here. As you can see, everybody got dry land. Anybody dry land, cropland? Okay. Again, I'm trying to make sure we hit what you really want. So as you can see in the Southwest, $58 an acre, down 3% from last year. In the South, $115 an acre, down 4%, and then that Central area, $125, down 4%. So is that kind of what you've seen in your area? Yes, no, maybe so. You just knew it went down. Oh, and it may not have, because it depends. I mean, everybody's situation is going to be different. you know, the tax man's gonna want his money anyways, and so's the insurance agent, right? At the end of the day. So that's something to really think about. Especially when you're looking at if you're a landowner trying to cover your margins, or if I'm assuming you're a farmer. Okay. But I'm making assumptions here. So if I'm wrong, please let me know.
$15 an acre is what you should get for cash rent on dry land.
That's the average. It could be more, it could be less, depending on the quality of the ground, what's located around it. Does it have potential for irrigation in the future? You never know. There's always a lot of variables. And I was gonna say, yes. I was like, so, there's a wide variation in a lot of those.
Yeah.
So,
and I
yes.
would say for us, most of our cash rents this year so far we have not gone down. Stayed where we're at. I mean, we're not raising any cash rents except for on pasture, obviously, but most everything we've had stayed steady. Now, I will say if things don't change through 2026, we will have a lot more tenants that are probably
gonna have to
a lot more aggressive next fall on adjusting those rental rates down.
Could come down.
Well,
Yeah.
So
Rental rates go up really fast. They don't come down very fast.
Well, but again, we've also had pretty large increases in taxes in the last few years on our property taxes. So,
Sure.
and insurance, there was I'm trying to remember where I saw the number, but I saw that nationwide farm insurance has gone up on average, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think it's right based on when I talk to my folks, 15 to 20%. So you have to make sure you're covering.
The other thing I think will come into play, especially on dry land cash rent rates, and that I've talked to many tenants about, is the bridge payment that Trump just dropped.
Yes,
I mean,
but we don't know how that's going to work. That's the big caveat at this point, is we don't know.
Right.
I keep trying to find out about it, and there's not a lot of info out yet.
Well, the numbers that
but it's coming.
The numbers that they've released is
like
almost $40 an acre on wheat. We have some dry land cash rents up towards the panhandle that aren't $40. So the thing to those tenants is you're going to get a government payment that technically covers your rental rate.
rental rate. Yeah.
Now, obviously, we don't know how many more of those will ever come, and I mean that's
right.
Kind of that ball, but that is something to take into account that I think may help steady things,
offset
things from decreasing,
yeah,
especially on dry.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say again, if you're a landowner, you got to make sure all your bills are covered, and if you're using it for income, right, to pay your groceries and your electric bill, I think there's room for negotiation on both sides. So we'll talk a lot about that later on, but I do believe communication is important. But I think this conversation is really important to have right now, because again, there is a lot of wide variation. I mean, this is 87 to 140. You're looking at 45 to 73. And technically, I will say this, Jim throws out the wild one. So you might have somebody that's getting $90 in the Southwest. I don't know. But if there are wild outliers, I do know those get. So, yeah. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the USDA National Ag Statistics Service. And that'll be those those maps on the corner of your paper, sir. I was like, there are larger versions at the very back, though, so you can actually hopefully kind of read it. It's like, but basically every other year, unless the USDA gives them more money, National Ag Statistics Service. Oh yeah, sorry, go grab. I was like, they do a survey every other year of producers, where they basically ask, well, they do producers and they do landowners. What are you paying, or what are you getting for cash rent, basically? So they come in with that, and usually that comes out, I feel like September. So, oh yeah, look at that. So again, we're looking at Perkins that's saying an average of 55.50 for tickets. Okay, for the non-irrigated cropland. So again, dry land is 55.50. I mean, they're all over in this region if you look. And again, this is kind of their range they've given, is between 28 and 293. So it's, I would say, very wide. So this is gravity irrigated cropland. The average rental rates are going to be 185, 250, and then 260, depending on which region you're in. So, and again, in that Southwest, we've got 140 to 220. So what's that? Like an $80 difference, depending on. And again, a lot of that'll depend on location, who owns what on the ground. Does the renter own the pivot? Do you own the electric box? Do you own everything that's under the ground, which is typically what happens most of the time? Yeah. So, but is that kind of what you're seeing in your areas, or is this wild and out?
That's just gravity.
That's just gravity. Yeah. We're going to get to that next.
The
We're
other
on the way.
the other thing about Nebraska is really good about keeping gravity separated out. NAS does not.
Yes. Yep.
So if you have any input on, I know the Panhandle fights pretty hard for this survey to be done, continue to be done, because obviously there's a lot more gravity in the Panhandle than
Yeah.
any other state. But just know that NAS lumps it all into irrigated, whereas
Correct.
Nebraska still splits out.
Which is really nice, especially when you're looking at, okay, what do I kind of need to charge,
Yeah.
or what can I afford to pay when I'm looking at, all my bills, whether that's taxes, insurance, input costs, all that stuff. So this is center pivot irrigated cropland. So again, central average is 285, Southwest is 215, South is 305. Again, down a little bit, but if you think, again, if you're a landowner, it's generally one of the few areas that a renter has area for negotiation, because I was like, are they able to negotiate with the fertilizer and seed dealer? Not usually, right? Not usually with the insecticide or herbs. I see you're like, yeah, but I was like, but yeah, they do have room to come in. I was like, I've worked with both sides where they're like, again, taxes and insurance have gone up so much this last year. They're like, I gotta have X, Y, and Z. And then also producers are like, this is what I think I'm going to make, and then try to have that happy middle, hopefully. So these are kind of the ranges that Jim has come up with. So the Southwest, you're looking at 180 to 255. Again, that average of 215. The South is 260 to 355 with that average of 305. And then the Central is 230 to 350 with an average of 285. So, and again, kind of what you're seeing in your areas in general. Yeah. Okay. Is that good or is that depressing based on your, I was like, I'm trying to figure out based on your faces. Okay. So again, this is, like you said, they don't pull out the gravity irrigated versus the pivot. So it's all irrigated cropland by NAS, but they do break it out by county if they can get enough data. I believe if they have fewer than 3 people, they don't actually report anything, which is why you see several blank spots. So, and if you're like my dad, you get that, and then sometimes he remembers to fill it out, and sometimes it ends up in the recycling receptacle or the garbage can. So, but yeah, so Perkins, as you can see, 206, but again, keep in mind that throws everything together. So, yeah. Do you have any questions about any of these counties you're seeing up here, or anything in particular? Again, this is a small enough group, and you seem to sort of know each other, so it's like,
Surprised there's such a difference between Chase and Perkins.
yeah,
I would assume a lot of that, especially where that number is even like 250, it's probably just a limited number of, like she said, I mean, if only 3 people put it.
Oh,
it could
If you
be.
get on the NAS website and break it all down on their deal, it'll show you how.
They'll show you how many people actually reported.
Some of them. Kind of, I think how many people.
Well, they have their own algorithm that they do for this. That's like a weighted average. That they do themselves. That's what I'm going to say.
Anybody getting a phone call the same day you get it in the mail?
Or before it goes to the mail.
Before. So, yeah. But yeah, so again, that's why I'm like, kind of take it as a general, I like it with a grain of salt to some extent, but it's a nice guide. It's a good starting point to have an idea of what the going rates are. But again, I'm going to tell you, take everything with a grain of salt. So, because everybody's situation is different. Anybody do per acre for pasture? Okay. All right. We'll do pairs too, just so you know, in case anybody's wondering that. So again, that Southwest, $29 an acre. That's up 5%. Again, a lot of this, I mean, I feel like there's a historical, well, we know there's like historical trends. We know when the cattle market is up, that generally the crop market is not, right? And I work in West Central, North Platte, a lot of people have both. It's like in my area that I cover a lot of, I was like, a lot of folks have both. So if they're sad about the cattle market, they're usually happy about the corn market. Vice versa also applies. And again, you can kind of see here that those prices have gone up this last year because of the cattle market increase typically is kind of what we're assuming. So that Southwest is $29 an acre, up 5%. The Central's 48, down 1%. And then the South is 45, up 1%. So no double digit increases, unlike a few years ago in the crop market. So, because I remember one year, I forget which region it was, but I think it was 23. Samantha, I don't know if you remember either. But some of these regions had like 10 and 11% increases in their rate. So
I think it'll be interesting to see
For
what
cropland.
26 is.
I'm interested.
Yes.
I'm
So most of the leases we've renegotiated
are about the same.
are
That's what I've heard.
a lot of it is pasture leases are always long-term leases that were locked in 5, 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
At a rate or an adjusted rate. And that rate is still substantially under the market. And so
Oh, really?
we've stepped up.
Okay. Yeah, that happened. So again, the Southwest, you're looking at generally a range between 20 and 37-ish. It could be higher, it could be lower. You're looking at an average of about 29. Central, 32 to 65. South, 33 to 54. Some of that is, and we'll get to this when we talk about pairs too. I always say sometimes it depends on the package you're offering as a landowner. Some of those can get really high, especially when we do per pair per month. If you're offering what I like to call the Cadillac package. I know some people that do what they call a Lexus package, which is a step under Cadillac. But when I say Cadillac, I mean they're taking care of the cows, they're checking the water, they're checking the fence, they're checking the cows every day. So again, they're doctoring anybody. There's a lot of room for range in some of these, depending on, again, what is being offered. So again, you can see Perkins, $22 an acre, Chase, $19.50. Those are actually a lot closer this time for pasture cash rent. So this is pairs. Anybody charge per pair? No? So, all right, the Southwest again, 55, let's say, to $70. South, you're looking at 50 to 71. And again, some of that depends on those packages that are offered. If you're just doing the land itself, it might be average or a little under, depending on the quality and location of water. Is there a well or pipe or whatever available? So there's a lot of variability is what I'm saying with regards to the cost of pasture land, much like cropland. So anybody got stalkers? Seeing none? All right, we'll skip that. So there are quite a few methods for actually setting rental rates. I am going to be honest, I am a big fan of the KISS method, keeping it simple. It's like, so figuring out what my baseline needs are, either as a tenant or as a landowner, and figuring out this is what I can afford to pay, or this is what I need to live. So there are a bunch of different ways to figure out land rent though. So here's one. This is basically doing it by adjusting survey data. So in this one, they're pulling county rental rates from like RMA or FSA, where you can get like the actual like bushels and then getting your actual bushel history, your APH yield. So the county rental rate is $190 an acre. Again, this is the county corn yield. So it's 145. And then the county rent a bushel is just divided out to get $1.31 a bushel. So what they're doing is taking $1.31 by their APH to get 170.34. So that's again, that's just one way to calculate. We'll go through a few different ones. You can make this as simple or as complicated as you want. So again, they pulled those USDA RMA county yield reports. I'm not gonna lie, 9 times out of 10, I pull FSA just because it's easy for me to get a hold of and I know where it's at. But this is just one way for you to do it. So they have also, this is the cash equivalent from a crop share. So it's not an actual crop share, but it's basically what the cash equivalent, because when it comes to crop share, we'll kind of talk about those legalities a little later. Do you do any crop share with folks?
A
A
majority.
majority? Okay. So the big thing with crop share is legally, if you're doing it, you absolutely, at least in my mind, you have to market it. But if you do that, then you get to pick your own insurance. You get a share of ARC PLC. You get a share of that bridge assistance, right? You do something like this, it's a cash equivalent. You're not getting any extra, basically. I mean, I don't think there's extra, but you know what I mean? There wouldn't be an opportunity for that. So here is assuming, I believe, a 50-50 split. So half of that is 80 bushels an acre. Your price a bushel is 466. So your income is 372.80. Take out what the owner's expenses are, which is about 182. Also, this is a really old example, just since I was like, so we have a net return of 190.80. And then you can do this again, depending on when your crop is due. So whether that's March, July, or November, most folks around here, it's November, December. But, and then you can figure it out. I've also seen people that do this and then take the average of all three, but that's can do what they want. It's like is what I will say. So this would be a cash equivalent from a hay share. So we're looking at a 1/3, 2/3, and then a 50-50. So the 1/3, 2/3, you're looking at half a ton an acre, right? So they do a ton and a half. Times 120 a ton, 59.40. Assuming zero owner's expenses for some reason here, so you get 59.40 an acre versus if you do a 50-50 split, you get $120 a ton, $90 income, minus $25, which are the expenses, and you get $65 an acre. I don't know. Do you calculate anything like this, or are you, if someone's doing a cash equivalent, or is it just, I keep it simple. I tend to look at surveys, look at my ground, see what it is.
I usually use the very first one, I do the bushel.
Yeah.
That one's.
This one's a lot easier to do. Yeah.
Cash equivalent, I mean, you can that one's not.
Again, there's multiple ways to split a hair. So, right. I think that's the important thing is do whatever works for you and is most advantageous. Again, and hopefully help create a win-win situation for everybody. That's the goal. So we're going to talk a little bit about flex leases. There's 8,000 ways to do this. Okay. I'm not going to go over all these. I'm not going to lie. Do you do flex leases? I was like,
In this area, there's
Samantha, do you know?
I would say it's coming this direction, I think. You go further back east and
It's popular.
Are extremely popular. Like I said, there's so many different
Too many ways. Yeah.
So they're very complicated. And so I think where it could come into play is next fall when we start to renegotiate cash rents. If things haven't changed, I think some tenants are going to come back and want to negotiate the cash rents down. And I think a flex lease could be an option to say, okay, hey, we'll negotiate this down, but we're going to put a flex on there. So are all of you aware what a flex lease even is? Mm-hmm. So a flex lease is basically you have a base and then there's a flex option on top of it that could be based off of all of these.
So typically it's based off of, it could be yield, it could be price. And then most of the time you can see here, because Jim just did this in 22, it's revenue, which is a price times yield. So,
and usually, and it can be, if it's based off of price, it can be based off of the price the first Monday of every month at the local elevator. It can be based off the price January and then in December averaged. I mean, it could be so many different things.
That's why I was like, this can get, can make it, these can get overly complicated.
Yeah.
It's a personal opinion, not representative of the University of Nebraska, but they can be simple or they can be really difficult.
And the thing that we're thinking about on a flex lease in a yield situation is, to some extent, that's a punishment on your farmer or your tenant for being a good farmer. If you're like, hey, if you average over 260 bushels, we get.
And the county average is 190, let's say. Yeah.
But I know in the back east and like the Red River
Valley.
It's
popular out east.
I mean, they've got some flex rents within Farmers National that'll flex as much as they have to end up putting a cap on them.
So we'll get there. It's like, so the idea behind the flex lease is to set a floor, again, that minimum of whatever hopefully you need, right? Not below that, and then have a base, which is what you hope in general should receive. And then you have a cap. We'll get there. There's pictures that are probably better than my explanation, quite frankly. So again, as you can see, crop insurance price guarantees are also sometimes used for reporting. Futures prices, local and cash are generally what most everybody I know that does this uses. So just because it's easier, like you said. So establishing that base rental rate, again, you could do the adjusting survey method. You could do the cash equivalent from a crop share method. You could do return on investment. And there are more than this. These are just the three ones I hear about the most. So the big thing is to ask what I am willing and able to accept. And the tenant is willing and able to pay, right? Again, figure out where that floor is and where that ceiling is on everybody's part. So again, what's the max I can pay? What's the minimum I'm willing to accept? So like I said, those taxes and insurance the last few years have gone up considerably for a lot of people. So the bases have risen to some extent. Compare the expected farm performance against the actual crop yield, the price or the revenue is generally how it's done. And again, like you said, if the performance is better, then you get paid a little more. And if it's under, you get a little less. But again, generally, we're going to set upper limits, lower limits. There's a good picture here. I'm just going to skip to the picture. I feel like this illustrates it way better than those words do. So, but you have your minimum rent, which is 170, which is going to cover your taxes, your insurance, and anything else, let's say. And then you have your base, which is what you expect to receive, which would be $200. And then your max, again, like you were saying, maybe somebody's a really good operator and so you have what I like to call a floor and a ceiling, and then the middle, which is where you think you're going to end up, hopefully. So it gives you a rental range of 170 to 230 in this example. But so even if technically it falls below that 170, you want to make sure if you're a landowner, you have that rental floor put in your flex lease when you write it. And we will talk about having written leases are really important. So, yes. So USDA Farm Bill requirements, FSA has specific regulations on farm program payments. They mandate that a cash lease include any specific guarantee of price or division crop within reason for that region. If an alternative lease is going to guarantee a minimum payment of, let's say, $200 an acre, is that requirement met? So again, FSA has to know about your lease in this case. So, and then what about if the guarantee is only $50 an acre? Then again, that's why it's really important. Set that base where you need it. As a tenant and landowner, it's really important to decide on when that payment is made. A lot of people I know prefer to get their payments up front. Some people do a 50-50 split, depending on, I don't know about Samantha, but I was like, I end up with a lot of phone calls. Most of the people I deal with have something bad happen. Most of them have had, I'm going to be honest, maybe it's going to be, it's usually widows. It's like, and they've had, their husband has rented out to whoever for 20 years and they haven't paid them in 9 months, right? And they've already taken the crop off the ground and used it, however. And so again, it's really important to establish when that payment is due. Another reason that I'm going to keep hammering home about the get it in writing if you can. So, and sometimes I'm going to be honest, it's more important that you get it in writing with family because it just establishes cleaner lines. It helps create some of those boundaries and it does, right? Because then it's like, okay, this is what it says. We both read it, hopefully. I was like, because I've also met humans, but I'm just saying, you signed it. You should have read it. So, yeah.
You either get it signed or you find a different printer.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. So, but yeah, no. And I was like, I feel bad because most of my stories are kind of sad, but it's almost always somebody that's called. I was talking to Talon earlier. He's like, yeah. And he's like, most of the time I'm not getting calls when people are having good luck. You know what I mean? We're getting calls when people are like, there's something wrong. So, yeah. Or I've gotten the calls where it's been a verbal lease for 20 years, like I said, and they're like, they grow corn and there are cows on the corn stalk, and they didn't realize that, like, again, with the verbal lease in the state of Nebraska, you don't have any rights to that residue. He can sublease it if he needs to. All of that stuff can happen, and like they had no earthly idea. So adjusting the base cash rent. So again, this is just one way. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Let's assume that the rental rate we expect is $200 an acre. The 5-year APH is 150 bushels. Let's say our actual ends up being 135. So we have a negative 15 bushels. And we calculate that out, and it's a 10% decrease. So our rental rate is $200 minus 10%, which would be $80 an acre. And again, in this case, we would hopefully have that base figured out. So this is an example where, again, if you're the landowner, you're real happy about this. So again, we have that $200 an acre. We have 150 APH. They do 165 this year. So 15 bushels an acre more than we expect. So it's 10% up. So instead of 200, we get 220 an acre. So this is just, again, one way to do it. There's a whole bunch of different ways to calculate this. That's what I'm going to tell you. If you decide to go a flex lease route, like I said, there's more than one way to do everything. So this is just an example of, again, that $200 an acre, 150 APH, 420. So we actually get 465. So we have 45 cents a bushel difference. So 10.7%. So again, calculate that percent change. So we have 200 an acre plus 21. So we get 221 in that case. Whereas let's say this one, right? We expect 420. So this is based on the price. We get 375. So we're down 45 cents from what we thought. That's down 10.7. So 200 minus that $21 an acre be 179. So again, gives you that flexible option. So since you've done some of these or have heard about them, do you anything else to add to that, or?
I would make it as simple as possible. And
Agreed.
hey, I don't know how good they are. The biggest thing is
I just hear about them all.
I have personally never done a flex lease, but the ones that we have back east, the biggest thing is to make sure your operator understands them, because especially if you do something where your numbers are determined after harvest, first of all, understand that can delay your income.
Right.
Because if like this year harvest is delayed till Thanksgiving, you're not getting proof of yield and the information back till December. You're probably not getting a check until close to the end of the year, after the end of the year.
Right.
So understand that, but I mean, as simple as possible, and make sure your operator understands what the stipulations are.
Yeah, because I think back to this last fall, I was like, I saw people out in tractors way late this year. So again, and if there's delays because of weather, that also delays when you receive the money. So this is a revenue option. So this is that combo of that price and yield option, right? So we have $200 an acre, an expected yield of 150, expected farm price of 469. So expected farm income of 699 an acre. So our actual was 140, so 10 bushels lower. Our price though was 541, which is higher than the 466 expected. So the actual farm income was 757. So again, you take the difference from that and then you calculate out that percentage change, which would be 8.4. So in this case, again, it's $200 an acre plus 17 would be 217. So again, same thing here, right? The only difference is we got 411 instead of 466, and we had higher bushels. So we had 165 instead of the 150. So we had 699, but we only ended up with 678 an acre in revenue. That's down $21. So that's minus 3%. So it'd be 194 an acre, basically, is what it works out to. Again, if you decide to go this route, I keep it simple. I was like, and also get everything in writing. I was like, so again, this is related to irrigation. So I'm assuming most of y'all have irrigated land of some sort, right? Okay. So generally there's some sort of split between landlord and tenant on who's maintaining it. Oftentimes what I hear, landlord maintains everything underground, tenant generally does above ground. Do you anything different for you? Or I mean, it depends, but most of the time that's
Yeah, I mean, most of our leases state if the landowner owns the pivot, then any repairs or expenses to the pivot
Is
are
it
paid for by the landlord,
landlord?
but have to be approved by the landlord or by us as the manager.
Yeah.
Before anything is done. And usually we have a dollar amount set where like
Yeah.
if anything over $1,000 has to be approved by us. But if they have a gearbox go out, we can get that taken care of.
Yes, I've heard of the limit too before, where if it's beyond X amount of dollars, you gotta
Yeah.
have negotiations.
That's
Talk
how
about
most are.
Yep.
And then in some rare situations, if the tenant owns the pivot, then obviously
Yep.
that they pay for it, but they also get a discount off their rent if they own the pivot.
Correct.
Landowner.
Yes, so discount on the cash rent when you own the pivot. When the tenant owns the pivot, generally 26 to 50, 10 to 25. I hear a lot of times that $30 range. That's what I hear most of the time. I don't know what.
Yeah,
No.
it's just totally.
I mean, I know it depends, but I hear a lot of $30.
Yeah,
That's what I feel like.
50 range.
Yeah, 26 to 50. So, but yeah,
The other thing on that is that's another thing that in a lease needs to be clearly stated.
oh my God,
It also
yeah,
needs to be clearly stated what happens if you kick that tenant off that farm. Is that tenant responsible to take that pivot down and move it, and what the time frame is to do so?
correct.
Or are you, the landowner, responsible for buying
That pivot.
from the tenant?
And also how to evaluate that, right? Because it's used and then how long. There's a lot involved in that.
Yeah. Yeah, make sure that's clearly stated.
Is this kind of, do y'all have any additional questions about this or kind of what you see or don't see or? Okay. All right. So again, this is the discount on cash rent per acre when the tenant owns that power unit, right? So, because you have a lot of times where either the tenant or the owner, depending on when the tenant owns the actual power unit. I've heard a lot of times, again, underground, typically landowner deals with, and then again, that power unit. So it depends on whether it's diesel, propane, or electric. Again, 15 to 21% do a $0 discount. Generally between 30 and 37 do $1 to $9 discount per acre. And then most of them, in that 35 to 45% of them do $10 to $20. And then you have a lot fewer that do $20 or more an acre discount, depending on who owns that power unit. So, and like I said, Jim broke it down by whether it was diesel, propane, or electrical. I know out again where I'm at, there's electrical's pretty popular. There were a lot of, and there still are, I think, quite a few. FSA, NRCS have some programs if you're looking to convert over that can help pay for it. So, but again, so what is contributing the most value to hunting leases? Because I was like, anybody who does like a verbal farmland lease may or may not know. Again, I'm guessing you may have experienced some of this. So, you do not, if it's a verbal lease in the state of Nebraska, and we'll talk about this more later, but I'm just going to hammer it home because I think it's really important. And I get these phone calls from people an awful lot. They think where landowners think they still have hunting rights to their ground, but it's a verbal lease. And then they go to their ground and somebody else is already there. So again, and especially if that's a really important aspect to your family and your culture, I was like, I know in my family, I was like, my dad leases out part of my dad and mom lease out part of their property, right? And do cash rent, but they always maintain the hunting.
That's what mine is.
And they maintain the right to sublease because they sublease to friends that like to come out and hunt. And also it helps pay for taxes. So I will say for about the last decade, that's how my parents have paid their property. Leasing it out. So yeah, no, it's a good clause to include if you're a landowner.
Mine's in all my leases that the landowner
Yeah.
maintains hunting rights.
Yeah. Or again, if you're a farmer and you like to hunt and you want to like negotiate that and you want to be able to do that, that's something you can ask. But again, vegetative cover, 37%. That proximity water is a big one because there's a lot of land that back in the day nobody thought was worth anything. And now it's premium hunting ground. So again, out where I live, that topography, where people were like 3 decades ago, nobody thought this was worth anything, but now this is prime hunting ground and it's worth a lot.
Was at a land lease auction in Julesburg the other day and for a foundation over there, and there's a pretty good sized chunk of ground that sits on the Julesburg Big Springs Highway on the
Mhm.
south side between the river and the highway. It is absolute junk dryland ground.
Yep.
It doesn't hardly raise a crop, but it has 4 goose pits on it. Sold for $52 an acre.
Yeah.
With a lease on it. And I mean, so that's why, just like you said, all of our leases with Farmers National, we retain all the hunting rights unless the landowner tells us otherwise.
Right.
And I mean, we don't have as much out here, but we have a full-fledged hunting lease network that if you want to lease out your hunting rights, we can actually do that to get you the additional income. Because if you're not getting it, somebody probably is.
That is true.
Or
Yep.
you also come into a liability issue.
Oh yeah, because you got to make sure you have insurance for that. We'll talk a little bit about that later, probably.
I
But
pulled onto a farm down by Ray this fall with the landowner. She came out from Oklahoma and we went out to the farm. We pulled in the opening weekend of dove season. There's
Oh,
two
yay.
pickups parked there and there's 4 guys out walking through. She has CRP corners around the pivots and there's 4 guys walking through these corners. And I said, "Are you aware of this?" She goes, "No." So we stopped and cornered the guys, and the tenant had given them access, and they've been doing it for years. And so we get back in the pickup, and she goes, "Well, if he gave him permission, I'm okay with it." And I said, "Well, here's the problem."
not. I'm sorry, I don't even live there. And it's not my land. That's why I was like, oh my God, no, because if they break an arm or accidentally shoot each other, which you don't want to think about, but it does happen because people are people. I'm going to be nice when I say that. But I'm like, so accidents happen. But yeah, so these are kind of different contributing factors. You've met people before too, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm thinking, well, just be easier, no more hunting.
Yep.
Yeah.
For outsiders.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Or again, there is insurance that I think it's a couple $100 a year for an additional $1 million to cover it, but there is specific like hunting insurance that you can get nowadays. So I would say talk to an insurance agent if you're interested in that. But it does add a lot of value because again, whether you're doing it with your family or not, or whatever. So it has a lot of value. That's what I'm gonna go with. So this is broken down by antelope, pheasants or quail, sorry, turkey, waterfowl, and then other game. And then they did it by that NAS statistics service. So we're in the Southwest, the South. Again, antelope and deer are some of the more popular, followed by pheasants and quail. And then now turkey's gotten really popular, I feel like, the last few years for a hunting game. So, I mean, honestly, you could come out to the station. They just come right up to the door.
They do.
And they are fat. I think somebody's feeding them. So I was like, but again, I mean, hunting has become such a huge recreational sport in the last few decades. I worked in South Dakota for several years with Extension, and I still work a lot with young students wanting to go back to the operation. And one of the big things I tell them, because I meet with them twice a year, and I'm like, you need to really sit down with your parents. And I said, they may be really mad at you, but you need to have them do a financial analysis and see if they can afford to bring you back. If they cannot afford to bring you back, you need to bring back a business. I worked with several young men back in South Dakota, and they worked with their dad. They brought back hunting businesses. Do you know that makes more money than now? They have lodges and everything. So you can go out there and visit. Hunt antelope and deer, pheasants and quail, depending on which part of the state. I mean, it's big business. So the average annual income for leasing hunting ground in Nebraska is 0 to $24.99, most popular. Again, a lot of times folks I know that do that, it's really to cover their taxes or insurance or whatever specific thing. You have 29% or about a third that do 25 to 4,999, and then you have that 8% plus, they're in that 5,000 plus range. So yeah. And I don't know what y'all do. So it's like,
I mean, that's a totally different sector of our business that I don't deal with.
Yeah.
We have a full-fledged hunting lease network, and we have a website where we auction off the leases. Like I said, we don't deal with near as much of it out in this part of the world.
Yeah.
You get back toward like the I-states, Missouri is pretty big for our hunting lease network, but
yeah.
there's a lot of money to be made.
I was gonna say, I don't know if y'all are in South Dakota, but I was like, it's huge there. I mean, for the whole state, particularly that northeast corner where they have a bunch of pheasants. But yeah, so it's pretty popular, I know. So again, depending on where you are, but like you said, sometimes you just want to retain the rights so that you don't have that liability risk. It depends, and then it just depends. So, so this is just basically talking about the Nebraska ag land studies. So basically what we've been looking at this whole time, it costs money to do that, but the information is for free. It's available on cap.unl.edu. If you want to help, it costs about $8,500 to $10,000 a year to put it on. Historically, the department has helped with that, but if anybody knows what's happened to the budget in the last year, you'll know that's not the case anymore. So again, they're looking for funding to help continue that study. So it's done every year. So we're going to talk a little bit. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about lease agreements. So again, landlords engaged in crop share lease arrangements typically receive a percentage of the actual crop yield as payment for leasing the property to the tenant. Landowner usually will help share that input costs. Oftentimes the tenant is the one putting in all the labor. Again, but it depends. Every situation is different, but usually with crop share, that's what I hear. Here we're going to talk about fair versus equitable. So a lot of people really like it because they perceive it as a fair way to rent if the expenses are split properly. Usually requires both parties to market their grain, again, just for legal purposes. Let's say y'all two are doing stuff together, but you guys do a crop share. I'm just going to pick on you. I hope that's okay. I was like, you're like, yeah, you're used to it, aren't you? I was like, but let's say you do a crop share and let's say it's a 60-40 split. Let's say you're the landowner, so you get 40. You help with the inputs. He does all the labor, right? You still have to market your own grain. You can't ask him to go, oh, just market it for me. There's a bunch of legalities. That's what I would say. It's a big liability on your part. So you're sharing the risk and the reward. So
And that's something
Yeah.
as a landlord, I don't really care to do.
and that's okay. That's why that's why there are flex lease, so there's cash rent, there's all kinds of different ways to split that hair. So again, so the idea is that you share the crop income, both parties receive their share of that revenue, crop insurance payments, and any government. So like that bridge assistance program that have y'all heard of that in the news? Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's heard about it because hopefully we'll hear more soon. Like, so
Well, it's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be coming up.
28. They released the dollar amounts.
Yes.
At the end of the year.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll hear more how that's going to be distributed soon. So
Yeah, I think it's just an automatic, it's kind of like the first round of the SDRP stuff. It'll be.
I assume it's going to be the same
a
thing.
pre-filled out sheet you receive from the FSA. You
Yep.
sign it, send it back. and
That's where it's good to know your FSA and then have them know your
2025 crop report
is in.
and accurate prior to, I think it was December 15th.
So, but again, so one of the perks of crop share is that you get to pick your own insurance, basically. You don't have to have the same, I'm just going to pick on you guys. I'm sorry. You seem like good sports. It's like, let's say you do 85 and you do 80% insurance for whatever reason, RPHP and then RPHPE. So again, you get to pick your own options with what you want to do, or you could just pick the same one. It's fine too. But also again, you both have to go down to FSA. You both got to sign up. You got to let them know they got to have all that fun stuff. So, but generally you need to contribute inputs as well as share price and yield risk. So the most typical ones in the state are 40-60, 50-50, 1/3, 2/3, with the smaller amount typically going to the landowner. Irrigated crop in the eastern part of the state oftentimes is that 50-50 split. Non-irrigated in the southeast, south central, southwest, so kind of this area, 40-60 a lot of times, and then the panhandle is usually that 1/3, 2/3 a lot of times. It depends on the crop, the neighborhood, expenses, all that stuff. Again, everything is really negotiable at the end of the day. Well, I shouldn't say everything, but when we're talking about crop shares, those splits are. So this is just early input from survey. Jim has sent out one. He's trying to get information back basically to figure out what's going on if you look at like a 50-50 split statewide. So he's looking at seed, fertilizer, in-season insecticide, fungicide, all of that stuff, and trying to see how that's potentially broken down. What's shared, what the tenant does, what the landowner does, and then he's got a non-applicable, but hopefully they'll get more data and this will be out soon. So as far as things go to the landowner, the landlord, things like taxes, insurance, irrigation operation and maintenance fees. Again, it depends on your situation, who owns what. Depreciation, insurance, any sort of major repairs, taxes, interest, all that jazz. But you get the share of crop insurance, fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide, energy for irrigation. So whether that is fuel or electricity, and then you market your own share of that crop. The tenant, again, those expenses are labor. That's usually one of their biggest contributing factors. Minor irrigation equipment repairs and maintenance. So again, if it's under that $1,000 limit, right, they'll take care of it sometimes. It depends on how that lease is negotiated. All field operations, cost of transporting the landlord's share of the crop to whatever their designated location is. Again, everything's negotiable. And then they get their share of crop insurance. Again, the input costs, energy for that irrigation and the seed. So, and then again, really important part is that marketing your own share. So some paper lease provisions. And again, if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to throw them out there. I've already said this, but get it in writing. I will say a lot of people in the last few years have converted over verbal leases, it seems like, to written leases. So, again, please get it in writing. If Nebraska, verbal leases for farmland end by September 1. If you're ending it for the next year, is it the next year? You have to have it. If you're ending a verbal lease for farmland, not pasture land, pasture land is assumed to end when the grazing season ends. And it's also assumed to only be that 5 to 6 month grazing period. So, but that has also not been tested in court yet, according to the lawyers I have spoken to about this. So, but yeah. So it's really important, if you can, to get it in writing, to the starting and end date of the lease, the length of the lease, the timing of lease termination, how much notice do they get, 30, 60, 90, 6 months. Again, if you don't have a written lease, the state has one for you, especially for farmland. So you have to get it in 6 months prior, which according to their dates is before September 1, which is why we recommend, if you have a verbal lease and you're looking to terminate, send it to them via registered mail, because they have to sign for it and you get a copy of that signature. So you know legally somebody received it. They may not have opened and looked at it, but legally you have that paper saying they've got it. So again, are there any holdover clauses? Do you talk about things like, again, I'm thinking cattle, if you have pasture land you're leasing, what happens in the event of a fire? I was like, I mean, these are just things to think about, or like a severe storm, hail, all kinds of stuff happens. When is the payment due? So those handshake lease agreements follow the following guidelines. Now, this is specific to farmland. Termination notice has to be given before September 1. And again, that's why I was like, we really recommend, if you have a verbal one and you're terminating it, to send it via registered mail. There are fill-in-the-blank written leases available that are legally binding in the state of Nebraska. You can get those at Ag Lease 101. And even if you have land in other states, it's legally binding in 28 states. It was a consortium of universities and attorneys that got together and created these. And you can add addendums and amend them however you want. But now if you, let's say you guys are together and you're doing a written lease and you decide to make an amendment, both of you make sure you initial next to that amendment and if you wrote it in. So
Does Nebraska have its own leases? And a blank one?
yeah, so they are,
That's it.
that's legally binding for Nebraska at least 101. Yeah, we actually participate. Jim is the one who goes to those meetings and they just got funding. They've actually updated these. So yeah. That's why I was like, no, these are fully legally binding documents in the state of Nebraska. So yeah. But pasture and grazing is very different. Again, typically a 5-month lease, typically May to October or June to November. Notice of termination, not specifically required for a handshake agreement for pasture. It's assumed the lease automatically terminates at the end of the season. That being said, again, I say never been tested in court. So I can't guarantee anything, is what I'm saying. But communication is going to be really key with this. So here are some things that people like to include in terms of fertility. And if I don't know if you guys include any of this in yours or not. I know when I talked to Forrest, some of his landowners wanted to make sure. I work with landowners that they're like, if you rent my land and it's got X amount of nitrogen, when you leave, it's going to have X amount of nitrogen. So, or phosphorus or whatever. But I just remember specifically a case about nitrogen. So it's like, because they were like, I was like, so again, phosphorus, the minimum to be left in the soil at the end of the lease, the maximum that can be in the soil. So think manure applications, right? You can protect the tenant with a clause if a large amount is applied. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Mining of the soil, again, consider soil test at the end of the lease. Minimum nutrients left must be followed. Do you guys have any of that in yours or no?
And you could add, ours just basically state a very vague statement of the tenant, is responsible to not be mining the soil.
Mhm.
And so obviously, as we do checks throughout the year, you get soil
Samples.
and stuff. That's stuff we're checking on. Usually it's not too big of an issue. I would say if you're getting higher cash rents from guys and they're pushing it and trying to get as much out of it, that's where you get into more of those issues. But
Yeah.
The big thing is residue, is making sure.
Uh-huh.
And that's why if they're baling stock, if they're grazing stocks, if they're doing any of that or pulling any sort of residue off, that is, you are due your portion of that residue.
Yeah.
So if your split's 60-40, you should be getting 40% of what they're getting off of those stocks.
Yep.
And you also are the one that can tell them yes or no to take those off,
Mhm.
because they're technically removing nutrients from
The soil.
from your
ground. Yeah. So lime is one that's included. It's typically considered a landlord expense. If the tenant is applying, then again, you can add additional clauses and get discounts if you want.
manure is the same way.
Yep. So, these are just some lease provisions that are sometimes used for soil health and environmental concerns. Fixing excessive erosion, again, can be a point of negotiation too if you're looking to go up or down. Typically, it's a landlord's expense. Non-crop acres. So this is a question I get a lot. Who controls the cedar trees and noxious weeds? Right? So, and I'm like, what's in your lease? So, till versus no-till considerations. I've seen people that put in specifically like, we only want you to use no-till on the ground. Organic versus non-organic production. There's a lot of young farmers that are looking for organic ground, which is really hard to find. So, but it just depends. And it takes, I think, 7 years. I don't know how long it is. I know there's a time period for switching over there. But yeah, so these are just some considerations that could potentially, again, be added or be points of negotiation. For pastures, if there is a pasture, who is taking care of the fencing? Again, this is where I said, if you look back at some of those prices on per pair, I was like, you'll find some people, sometimes the landowners are the one doing all that, and then sometimes the cattle owners are. So again, know what happens if there's those big 3 disasters: fire, hail, or drought, especially for cattle, right? What is our trigger date? How soon? I was like, again, hunting rights, again, that crop ground versus pasture. If you're the landowner and you want to retain those rights, a written lease is going to help you, because if it's verbal, they have those rights.
The other thing on the pasture for fire, hail, and drought, the government, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, yeah, but I'm pretty sure the government payments that come out on those disaster relief programs go to
Yes,
the cattle owner.
correct.
So you as a pasture landowner don't get to receive any of those. They go to whoever owns the cattle.
Correct.
So no one understand that if you have pasture, you're not going to receive any of those things.
Right. But hopefully you're receiving your full
Right.
rent.
Right. I think everybody I rent to, they have NAP.
Yes,
True.
that's a good one. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it burns off. They're gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can go buy feed wherever.
So, and then there's the Nebraska recreational use law. Again, those hunting rights, and then rec use. So a lot of people like 4-wheeling's a recreational thing now. I was like, we always did it to check the cows, but It's like, there's a lot of recreational use of our land now. So again, knowing what your rights as a landowner and as a leasee, really important. And again, figuring out what you're willing to compromise and not. So some other lease provisions, again, corn stalk use. So we'll go back to that. Grazing versus harvesting is bedding, removing all materials or not removing them. So again, this is where having a written lease is really nice because I've gotten several calls this last year from people that had verbal cropland leases. And again, they're usually widows. So, and they're like, why are there cows here? And I'm like, what does it say in your lease? And they're like, well, my husband did the leasing with them for years and it was just always, a handshake deal. And I'm like, well, and they're mad because, right, they subleased it out and with cattle prices, some of them made good money, but so.
And you are as the landowner, most of ours, we allow if the tenant has cattle themselves,
Yes,
they can use it.
they can use it.
If they don't, then we don't allow them to.
Correct.
Or if we do, then obviously you get your portion of that. The other thing at that point to talk about is who's paying for turning a well on and water filling
Right.
tanks? Who's paying for any damage to the pivot or
Yep.
center points if there is damage? And so
Stock
those are all
rates,
things
all
to
that.
take into account. Because a lot of people just think grazing corn stalks isn't that big of a deal, but when it comes down to it, there's definitely some things that need to be
Talked about. Yeah.
What are rental rates for stocks? Is that different than pastures? Do you have access for
Yes.
that?
I don't know what that is currently. I know it's usually less.
we're
So
usually like 10 to 15 bucks.
yeah.
Yeah, I think here it's roughly 2,000 a circle,
Yeah.
pretty close.
Yeah, probably.
And that,
Yeah, that makes sense.
they fence it.
Yeah.
Everything.
So yeah.
So that'd be it's probably 15 bucks an acre.
Yeah.
And that makes, yeah. So, and then if you're allowing them to do manure application, how often, what are the limits again of application? So irrigation equipment, we've kind of talked about this a little bit already. So general assumption, and again, this general, so not everybody's doing it the same, is that all ownership costs are with the landlord. But it's really common for the tenant to provide some upkeep of the costs of repairs, usually up to that $1,000 limit is what I hear a lot. Especially labor deductible on parts. Again, it's a little lady. I was like that called and she's like, again, this is where we have verbal agreements. Can you tell? And then she's like, he called and said I need to clean out the pivot. It's a little like 70-year-old lady, a little 70-year-old lady. And she's like, is there somebody I can hire to do that? 'Cause she's like, I don't think I can do that. So again, having some of these discussions up front is really important. So, but yeah. So if the entire systems are being purchased by the tenant, then again, rent adjustment can happen sometimes. So, communication is going to be really big if you're a tenant and a landlord. Again, I hope I've started to hammer this home, but that's right.
We've seen them.
Oh, have you? Okay. But you really want to force yourself to share information, even for cash leases. Again, because that's somebody else's land, especially if you're a tenant. So I was like, it's important for them to know that you're doing your best to take care of it. But if there's a drought, if there's hail, let them know what's going on, whether that's a phone call, an email, a text message, if you got to go to the coffee shop, depending on the person. So, again, send timely crop updates a couple 4 times a year or more. Include things like moisture conditions. Because again, if we're in a drought, you're like, oh, it's not looking good, man. It's like, be honest. Weed, disease, or insect pressures. Consider, again, sending texts or emails with pictures. A photo tells a lot. So, as a landlord, what you want to communicate overall management of the farm. Do you have specific visions or goals? Again, things like weed control, erosion control. Do you need someone else to manage those non-crop acres, right? Expectations for that. And then if they're using the farmstead, what is the expectation for managing that asset or the house? So, because I've gotten those phone calls where they're like, the house is now falling down. So I was like, because it's a lot to do. If you own a house, Samantha's shaking her head. I was like, but if own a house, rent a house, work on a house, when you own a house, it's a lot of work, right? Especially if it's an older house. So again, what is the expectation for managing that asset, keeping up with things? So, again, how is the tenant helping you? Are they maintaining terraces and waterways, controlling for noxious weeds, maintaining fences, maintaining the irrigation system? If the tenant is helping with some of these expenses, again, that rent can be a little bit more negotiable and should be adjusted. So here's where you can get some free fillable PDF leases if you're interested in looking at them. The thing I would advise is, again, these are legally binding in the state of Nebraska, but if you have a very specific use case, you can amend these, but I always recommend having a legal professional look at them because it's always handy just to make sure everybody's on the same page. But Ag Lease 101 is a great resource. It's got a bunch of different, again, lease forms. You can look at cash, you can crop share, pasture lease. They even have for building or livestock facility leases, and then machinery or non-commercial, and then again, livestock rental leases. But it's also got different publications on how to actually, I know we went through a lot of calculations, but they have full 10+ page publications on how to calculate things out. So it's a great resource. It's free. Your tax dollars paid for it. So I encourage you to take advantage of it and use it, So we want to take a break for a few minutes. We're about halfway through. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to get some water, stretch your legs. We've been sitting a while already. How are you doing?
Tenant. And sorry, I'm late.
No, you're fine. No problem.
I haven't had my coffee yet.
No, you're okay. Good. Oh, wait, this is like.
And the other thing too is depending on what
I was gonna say, I was like, yeah. So anyway, so we're gonna talk a little bit about farmland transition and succession. Just as a note, this is material that's been prepared for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. I am none of those things. However, if you do have questions about actually like creating that transition process, I am actually a certified farm and ranch transition person. So I have those certifications. I do upkeep that. I do work with farm families that want to plan, usually with their lawyer and banker and accountant in tow. But yeah, so this program is really just to talk about it. Again, generate discussion, thoughts. Anybody in here have an actual estate and or transition plan? Because those are two different things. Yay, good job. I was like, so basically, why should we start thinking about it? 98% of farms are family owned. I'm assuming most people in here own, work on with family, right? Which so much fun, but also can be so difficult at times, right? Again, working with family can be a lot of fun, but can cause some friction as well. Active operators or retired farms own about 75% of, just like you talked about a minute ago. A lot of years have shifted over to where they're just retired. About half of operations do not have succession plans or they are out of date. So I guess that's the other thing. I was like, for those that do have like a will, a trust, some sort of setup, have you looked at it in the last 3 to 5 years? I would ask. So good job. You're really ahead of the game here. I was like,
A lot of stuff happening.
I get it. I was like,
Triggering factor.
it does. So I was like, usually when I I do programs specifically for farm and ranch, and it's about 3 hours long. And I'm actually doing one called Organize This that's not specific to farm and ranch, but specific to making sure you get all of your information together and let somebody know where it's at. We do 4 online programs throughout the year, but it's a year long with like check-ins to make sure people are doing. So
Did
again,
you have anything in place before something triggered it?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Not.
You know,
Mhm.
As good as it should have been. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, most people, they have something written down somewhere, but is it legally binding? So farms and other assets will transfer with or without a plan. As I always say, if you don't have a plan, the state does.
Mhm.
And let me tell you, the state's plan's more expensive than yours would cost to get done. And the state's plan may not do what you want it to do. You're shaking your head no. Yeah, you've experienced some. Yeah. So again, now this is from 2019. So I know this is a little old, but this is from Iowa farmers that were surveyed. 20% never retire. I was like, over a half semi-retire, which I'm going to be honest is my dad. I was like, I consider him semi-retired. He's 83, by the way. I was like, I'm what you call a late in life child. So, and then only about 25% plan to completely retire. And I will say, usually the ones that end up completely retiring, oftentimes it's for medical reasons, right? So
I would also say
even the semi-retire.
this is a good slide. I mean, Iowa
Yeah.
farmers, all of us think, well, those guys have it easy. They're pretty much all semi-retired anyways. But 2019, I would tell you from our standpoint as from Farmers National, the generational wealth transfer, I would say
Started
from
happening.
out here to Iowa, we're probably 10 to 15 years behind.
Behind.
And so realistically, 2019, that's a good slide because that means for us, 2029 roughly,
Right.
we're going to start to see the generational wealth transfer that Iowa has
Started seeing. Yeah. So here are some of the reasons why farmers are retiring at a later age or only semi-retiring. 75% have a difficult time actually giving up control of the farm. 69%, we have a lot of modern equipment. As I always like to say, I'm from a farm and ranch in Florida. Our tractor has air conditioning, okay? I'm like, so again, stuff like that is really, and they have steps, they have all kinds of assisted things that make it much easier to farm longer now.
And agility.
Yes. That's
another
true.
one.
Agribilities
The
also does a whole bunch of
Yeah.
work. So
program.
I think it came out today or yesterday. I did an entire paper nerding out basically over like different assistive technologies that are available. And Nebraska actually has one of the higher adoption rates for ag technologies, particularly for farmers and cropland and stuff. So it's fascinating. Sorry. Again, I get very nerdy about certain things. I was like, but again, that modern equipment allows us to farm longer. We also have pretty good medical care in the US. I was like, even if we're living in a rural area, I always think it's the older I get, the more I'm like, it's kind of wild that 200 years ago, the average lifespan was 35 years. If you look about it and you really think about it, it wasn't that long ago. And now in the US, the average man lives to, I think, 76 or 78. The average woman's 81. So again, I'm just going to say my dad's 83. I was like, keep that in mind, right? So 55% do not have an actual successor. And then again, 54%, you just don't know what else you do with your time. And I'm gonna pull my dad here a lot because again, we've had a lot of conversations in the last couple of years because he's had some medical stuff. So he's had to retire even quicker at 83. He thought he would. So again, you know, he doesn't know what else he'd do. But my dad always said, he's like, if you stop moving, that's when you go. So and I think that's a belief a lot of farmers and ranchers I've met, that's their belief as well. A lot of farm families experience difficulty in discussing the future of the family farm. Just even thinking about what's going to happen when we're not here can be really difficult. Not just for ourselves, but like the kids sometimes do not want to discuss it. Like death is a really taboo thing, quite frankly. And I've done workout in like Guam and everywhere. It's taboo everywhere. That's what I'm going to tell you. Different levels of it, but like it's not a thing people want to talk about or think about, quite frankly. And oftentimes we don't until a critical life event happens. Again, we get those calls and somebody's really sick. So this is called the circle of inaction. We use a lot of circles in this presentation. You'll notice later on. It's like, but it's that, and most of us have been here. How many people are like, I should have a plan, right? If I have young kids, I should have a will so that, you know, at least somebody I can choose who gets the kids, basically. You go to a meeting or you meet with an attorney, then you think, okay, that's a lot of steps. This is really complicated. So oftentimes people don't do anything. And then that wheel just kind of starts over again until something critical happens. Um, so why do we not actually plan? Oftentimes people assume it's too complicated. And I would say most people in here own land. Okay, everybody. I was like, right, we assume it's too complicated, but again, if you don't have a plan, the state does, and you may not like who gets it. So we don't like to plan in general. I do a lot on budgeting with families and farms. People spend more time planning their vacation than they do their family budget. So I'm just going to say we do not like to plan for things that are not pleasant. Like, and again, planning that transition and planning our own death and our own mortality, or again, even talking to our kids, because I was like, I've met some people that the parents are comfortable, they're ready to talk about it, but those kids are like, I don't even want to think about my parents not being here. Oh yeah, yeah. It's hard. It's hard to have those conversations. So it's a lot of mental work. And again, it's facing our own mortality in some format. So again, and some just do not want to think about death. I've met some people that do not come to these meetings, obviously, but come to other ones and they're like, you know what, my kids can just figure it out when I'm gone. That's literally their plan. So, and I'm like, okay. So again, and a lot of times people are afraid that if they do something, it's going to be wrong.
Yeah, but being somewhat wrong might be better than nothing.
Ding ding. Exactly. You got it. Being somewhat wrong is better than nothing. Because like I said, if you don't plan, the state will. And again, and the state's more expensive, by the way. Usually they have higher fees. There are ways to avoid some of that, going through a good attorney and setting things up appropriately. So,
Well, if you're afraid of heirs not getting along, not having a plan.
Oh my. Geez, yeah. My dad did not talk to my aunts for over a decade. And I'm going to tell you, it's over what's going to sound like the silliest thing. And I encourage you to laugh because it is funny, but it is over a love seat. Okay. Because my grandmother in her will, she did have a will, and I don't know if you've heard of this or if anybody here has had that experience, but in her will, she's like, okay, everybody gets back what they bought me. Did she have it listed what it was? No, but was it stated that way? See, yes, because but it's like, okay, my grandmother lived to 83, y'all. That's a lot of accumulation of things over time.
I just helped a client navigate a trust where the trust was put together extremely well. I was actually thoroughly surprised. And we, from the time of the grandmother's passing to when we were able to get deeds out and everything, we were already under a management agreement with the trust anyways.
Awesome.
Everybody in the higher up side of things with Farmers National was like, oh, you're going to manage under the trust for a year because it's going to take that long. That trust was spelled out so well that it took us a month to get deeds transferred.
Wow.
Everything done because everybody
that was fast
in the trust.
Yeah, because I would have assumed 6 months to a year.
And heirs are all civil, are getting along because in that trust, it said, this one gets this one gets this one gets this.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of the attorney?
No.
But that's important.
Got anything bad to say about the one I've written? No.
You know why?
Yeah, the one in Bridgeport is my wife.
Oh, that's nice.
So I
can put that together.
Together quick. You clocked it.
Say that one was not. This one was actually it was what the heck is his name? He lives in Lincoln or Omaha now, but he's originally from Garden County.
Oh, really?
He's who the attorney that put those trusts together was.
A Dennis, is it?
No, it's a Gray.
Okay.
Can't remember what his first name is.
I'll go for the girl in the Bridgeport.
No, but like that's a quick transfer because I also would have thought a year, because even if you have everything spelled out for the most part, I'm going to say for the most part, there's usually a hiccup or two along the way. So that's quick.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, everybody within Farmers National was like,
wow,
there's no way. I mean, we had to, it totally shuffled things around for us, but I mean,
yeah,
it worked through very well.
Yeah. Again, but this is also where comes back to communication. Communicate what's happening, why it's happening. That's a big one too, I will
Another
say.
thing that could have simplified that was there was nobody left on the farm.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
That also simplifies things.
Yes, that's true. That may have done it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, that's true. Yes. So what is transition planning? So it involves business planning, succession planning. Then we do sunset planning again, which is that point where, again, the succession when we actually start sunsetting, right? The sunset planning. How are we going to sunset? How many people in here actually plan to retire? Okay, cool. I'd rather you be honest. Oh, you do? I was like, okay. But hey, you know what? No, it's fine. Because here's what I'm going to pull again from my family. I was like, my dad literally believes if he stops moving, he's going to die. And he's 83, so he would know. I was like, what I'm going to say is, this is an endless cycle. You need to review this every 3 to 5 years. Okay. I was like,
Can you define like what
yes.
do you mean by business plan succession and especially sunset? I don't know.
Okay, so we'll get into that.
All right.
I'm glad you asked the question though. I was like, so business planning, it's when, and this is often when I'll have with college students that are wanting to go back to the operation. I was like, is this actually a viable operation for a whole another family and people to come on? Can the business support another family? And then what are those expectations for income, things like that? What is the future of that operation? Do you need to bring back a business? This is basically this discussion. Again, how are you teaching that next generation? This is where I'm going to say, if you have kids you're bringing back, take them to all the business meetings. Take them to the seed dealer, take them to your financial advisor, take them to your banker, take them to your attorney, take them to the pesticide dealer that you work with, get them to know, because if something happens to you and you're temporarily incapacitated, the world still keeps spinning, right? I don't know if anybody's ever experienced something like that happening, but it's really important to have a backup who knows what's going on and where things are stored. So this is part of that business planning. Consider handing over certain aspects of that business management or giving them decision-making power over a small percentage of the operation. I've also seen it where, again, some of that sunset and transition planning, they're leasing it out or do a rent-to-own agreement type of deal with their kids. I'm assuming kids here, but whoever their area is. So again, how is this planned? How is that transition working? So what are some of those triggering events? Could be things like death, disability, divorce, disagreement, bankruptcy, felony, could be illness. I'll just go ahead and tell you, part of my dad slowing down is we found out he has cancer. All right. So for him, that's really in the last year. We had this conversation when I was home at Christmas time, and he's like, I'm just so tired. I've just slowed down so much. And he's like, it's just so hard. And I'm like, I can understand that. So I was like, it's just, again, what is a triggering event within your plan? We had a plan that one of my parents being really ill, that's a triggering event. My sister makes all the financial and like management decisions on the operation and has, quite frankly, for about 7 years anyways. But again, we decided that like my dad was going to do the fun things he enjoyed, which is checking the cows, checking the fence, taking what we call the buggy. I was like, which is the UTV, out and like doing that. He can't do that every day anymore, but he used to. So again, what are these triggering events within your plan? And then what structures or agreements do you have in place to help transition that plan? Position descriptions, which are things we don't often think about, especially if it's our kid is our heir. Operating agreements. Again, this is where it goes back to, can I afford to buy a few acres from you every few years, right? A little at a time. What kind of entity? Are we doing an LLC? Are we doing a S corp? Are we doing just a partnership agreement of some sort? And then again, lease agreements versus buy-sell agreements. Our retirement and our sunset years. So this is our sunset planning. This is thinking about how much money do you currently draw from the farm or range? And this, again, all of this kind of ties back together and quite frankly is really a messy web at the end of the day because they go together. How much money do I need to live on, right? We talked about insurance going up in Texas, right? So again, we've got to be able to cover all those bills. We've got to make sure we're able to draw that out. We also have to pay for groceries, electricity, any sort of house repairs if we own our own home, things like that. So what are your honest plans for your sunset years? And this is a really important one to talk about. Is your spouse or partner on the same page? I started working with families where that's the first question I make them talk about, because you will often find one might be ready to move into town and one is like, absolutely not. I just remodeled my kitchen. We're not leaving. It's like, I have heard that discussion before, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go get a water. It's like, and let y'all talk. So again, have those discussions. Are you ready, willing, and able to communicate your financial needs during that transition and into your sunset years? So again, how much money do I need to draw from this operation in order to make sure I'm taken care of, but also can we support, again, that other family? So when do you plan to retire / slow down? Again, that goes back to some of these triggering events, what's going to happen. We can't plan for everything, but we can, again, talk about it. Like, what happens if mom or dad gets sick? What happens if, I get sick, right? Not mom or dad, because we don't ever think about that, but like, maybe something happens to Samantha or I'm going to pretend we're sisters now, right? Maybe we were farming with our parents. I just like to make up scenarios. It helps me. I'm just like, maybe we were farming with our parents, right? But like, maybe you're in a tractor accident.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry.
Samantha.
Poor Samantha. And now, like, you're permanently disabled. And like, we have to figure out, right? Sorry. We work together. It's fine. I was like, I can pick on you. I was like, but something happens and she's now permanently disabled, right? We didn't plan for that. Most of the time we don't think about it. So again, I hate to say expect the unexpected, but life will throw curveballs at you. So again, and then how long do you expect to live? Like I said, the average age of a man living in the US is somewhere, I want to say, between 76 and 78. The woman is 81. We are living longer and longer now.
But we only got a couple years left.
Again, I'm going to say my dad is 83 and still going fine. So, I was like, you never know. I was like, but most people are living longer and longer because, again, we have improved medicine. We have improved, again, just general life conditions. So we're quite lucky to be living in this time. But again, how much do you have saved? What are your sources of income for your sunset years? Oftentimes when I plan with people, especially if the kids are young enough, and I'm talking to the parents of like younger kids, I'm like, hey, if your kid is kind of like in middle school and talking about this, I was like, do you have a 401k? And they're like, no. And I'm like, you might want to think about it. Because I was like, that's one way for you to have a nest egg to draw from when you're older, if you want to bring your kid back. I was like, which again, most people, I mean, and I'm going to throw my dad under the bus because he's not here to defend himself. I was like, right? Planned on farming and ranching their whole life. No need to worry about anything else. I was like, but, having a 401k, and I know we don't like spending and putting the money in there, but it is a good way to create a little nest egg to draw from later in life. So, and especially if you're wanting to bring kids back. So when I talk to like kind of middle-aged farmers and ranchers, which I see several in this audience, quite frankly, that's a good one to talk about, fully funding a retirement account to live off of. Again, what is your funding withdrawal strategy? We'll talk about we'll talk about one particular way later, but this goes back to rental rates. Quite frankly, there's a lot of different ways to figure it out. So, and I don't know if you guys have any specific ones or yours is just more so like typically like lease related for funding strategies for people long term. Yours is just typically.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Nope, that's fine. I was like, but and this is another one nobody ever thinks about. What are your plans for long-term care, right? Are you going to need somebody to come out to the house and help you? I was like, nobody wants to think about the fact, again, Samantha ended up.
I know, now I'm disabled.
She's disabled. But I was like, maybe she can't do what so I work with a gerontologist. She's great out of South Dakota. Yes, you knew what I was going for. Activities of daily living, ADLs. I was like, can you bathe yourself? Can you feed yourself? Can you get yourself ready in the morning and put your clothes on? I was like, again, I've had some hard conversations with family members recently where I'm like, if it gets to the point where you can't do this anymore, we're going to have to look at getting some help and how are we financing this, right? So again, and then like, is it gonna be a point where we don't ever plan on anyone having dementia? Dementia care is very expensive. Has anybody ever had a family member that has either dementia, Alzheimer's? I know I should be seeing way more hands up in this room.
We've got one that we're currently through that.
It's-
And you made the comment about, having the discussion. I
Yeah.
would highly
Yeah.
encourage you
Oh, yeah.
to have that discussion in no uncertain terms.
Yep. Be
It's a-
upfront.
It's an uncomfortable discussion.
It
that's
is.
Gotta be had.
Yep.
If you don't have it, then you're gonna go speak with experience.
Yep.
A lot of other issues that come along behind that.
You're talking the long-term care.
The long-term
Yes.
care,
Yeah.
what's
Potential.
gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, put your shoes on
Right.
and go to the bathroom, what's gonna happen?
Yes. And that's an important one. Again, I had that one. I was like, because I was like, we gotta talk about this. Cause I was like, unfortunately, yeah. I don't like that I can see the future, but sometimes I can see the future.
So the dementia thing is
Yeah.
a nasty disease.
It is awful.
Watch my neighbor. She got it. She was 60 years old.
Oh, she was young.
And
That's
she
young
just-
for it. Yeah.
She had it for 5 years, finally died.
Oh,
84 pounds.
My wife's
Just-
grandma was like 62.
Nasty.
Yeah.
Wow.
my grandmother had it as well. That's why I was like, I know from personal, like we had to put her in a dementia care facility when I remember specifically when I was a child when all this happened and them having the discussion. Cause I was like, she was living with my parents at one point for additional help and she almost burned the house down. So, but again, hard discussions, but you got to have those. So, but you're right. You got to be frank. You got to be upfront. What happens when you can't tie your shoes? What happens when we accidentally light a cigarette and fall asleep and the couch catches on fire? That also happens. So again, personal experience.
Yes.
But so again, have that discussion and that is expensive. Not dementia care is even more expensive, but long-term health care, if they have to go into an assisted or you have to go into an assisted care facility, it's like $8,000 a month on average.
The other thing with that, and if you talk to my wife, you probably have heard this. My wife probably has more people walk in her door that are looking for a succession plan or something, or a way to do a trust to try to move assets.
And you got to do
Wherever
that
they go
early.
To a long-term care facility.
You got to
And
do
they-
that 5 years in advance at least.
And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like she would tell you, you're committing fraud to some extent. But the thing about it is there is ways to set up a trust or whatever you're doing, your succession plan.
Sorry,
To
that's
state that, if you have to go to a long-term assisted living, you want them to sell this quarter of
Correct.
town. And then.
Yes.
Proceeds to use
Yes.
to pay for your term care. Stuff like that could be spelled out.
So one of my good friends, her mother was like 92 when she ended up with dementia. And that's what ended up happening is that they had already had that conversation many years ago. Not so much the dementia conversation, but the like, oh, what happens if I need help? Because she was a nurse. So I think to some extent, sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes it's not. But yeah, they were able to provide that. The other thing I would say with that is if you pre-plan for, keep in mind, if the government is paying for your long-term care, they get to decide where you go. You could be on the other side of the state.
Yep. You
Um,
might have to share a room with somebody or.
Yeah. so that being said, I would say if you were a veteran, talk to your veteran services because they do have some great help with a lot of things. So, but yeah, that long-term care plan, really, really important to talk about how we're paying for that, what's happening. And again, you're right. And your wife's right that you can plan for some of that. But I also say as at the end of the day, and again, this was our hard conversation. I flat out told my siblings, I would much rather my parents be taken care of than me end up with money at the end of the day. Now, this is a personal opinion shared, but I was like, these are hard discussions you got to have in advance. So
No, it was their money.
100%, that's my thought too.
But-
Not everybody thinks that way. And that's what I'm going to tell you.
Sibling.
I'll say most of us are on the same page. So that's the good thing. So, but yeah, no, 100% having those discussions in advance, really, really important. So, And then again, do you plan to rent your land for retirement income or to help pay for things? Because you can do that. So again, anyone over 18 years old, I think I freaked my niece out because she has a kid. She's in her like early to mid 20s. And I was like, for Christmas, she got a will. I was like, you have a little one that's a year and a half. I was like, gotta pick somebody, right? I was like, you and your partner, I was like, you and he need to get that figured out. I was like, because if something happens to either one of you, because he works in the oil fields, I said, that is a very dangerous job. So I said, you guys got to make some decisions. So, and again, uncomfortable things to think about, but if you're gone and you got little people, who do you want taking care of them? So assign a personal representative, or depending on your state and or area, sometimes it's called an executor. Assets can be subject to probate, especially if you're using a will. They will be. Again, if you die without a will, that's called intestate. That means the state's going to determine how your assets are going to be distributed. And depending on the family lines and stuff, if you have kids, if you don't have kids, you know, there are different tiers to that. So another reason it's really good to have an attorney check everything out and get things set up for you in advance. The power of attorney is a really important one. It helps somebody manage assets in the event of disability or incapacity. I've talked to a few different attorneys. Some of them say whoever your POA is, it's good to have on your checking account. And then I've heard some say not to do that. I would just say, again, talk to your attorney. But I also think whoever's your power of attorney, you should quite frankly already trust them enough, right? So, because they're making decisions while you're incapacitated and out, right? Whether that's maybe you're going under for surgery and going to be out for a few days or whatever ends up happening. So again, you want a power of attorney. You want a power of attorney for healthcare that allows somebody to make healthcare decisions on your behalf, right? So if you have a kid that may have a medically related degree or certificate, that may be who you want, or maybe somebody else that you're really close to and you have some of those. Again, you're going to have uncomfortable conversations with this person, right? I'm POA healthcare for a few different people. I was like, I told them, I was like, I make them get a living will or healthcare. Because I was like, you have to have things spelled out. I was like, I will do whatever you want, but I would like it spelled out in advance. Because I was like, I don't know that I want to be the one making the decision to pull the plug. But if you have a living will and you are brain dead and you wrote in there, if I'm brain dead, pull the plug, that is your decision. And I am okay with doing that. So again, that's why it's really important to have both of these things ideally. And most in the state of Nebraska, if you go to your doctor and you ask for one of these, they have one. I know mine does. So you can get a free healthcare directive and fill it out however you want. But basically, it just outlines your health, your wishes for healthcare. And then when you die, it expires at death. So, but all these documents can be edited or replaced at any time. They're usually pretty reasonably priced to get. And it's again, really recommended for anyone over the age of 18 to have some of these. Does anybody in here have power of attorney? I know you do. You guys do? Okay. So again, you may need or want a trust, right? There's all different kinds of trusts out there. It might not be necessary. It just depends on who you are and what you've got. It avoids probate, which a lot of people like because they don't want everybody being able to pull their business off the internet, because if you have to go through probate, that's what you have to do. Well, you don't have to, but you know what I mean? It's posted publicly. You can find it. Make sure assets are transferred to the trust before death. Again, this is where having a good attorney comes in real handy. Making sure, because I've seen it happen a few times, unfortunately, where attorneys will set up trusts but things are not transferred. You laugh because you must have heard stories. I was like, where things are not transferred. Oh, and you also shake your head. Yes. So I'm assuming you've experienced where things are not appropriately transferred into trust or set up appropriately. So, or that there is a mechanism for transfer on death. In the state of Nebraska, we have a pour over option. So you can pour over into a trust upon dying, basically. So again, it just depends on how everything is set up. And it's, again, talk to your attorney. It's really important to have a good attorney you trust and are comfortable with.
So like in the ag world.
Yeah.
Between a will and a trust, what do you, in real life?
Most people get trusts. I mean, if you can afford it.
then-
So a trust, it's really just the avoiding probate. And you may want to speak to this since you're a partner as a lawyer, but maybe not. So
There's some tax advantages.
there's some tax advantages to doing a trust. It costs a little more upfront. This is where I'm like, again, if you don't decide on something, the state will. And I feel like the state tends to cost more money than even if you just do a will. But the trust is nice because you avoid probate. There are some tax advantages depending on how it's set up and how it's done. And it just a lot of people who are farms or ranches typically try to go the trust route most of the time. That's my experience, but I might also have a self-selection bias. You guys are here.
Talk about trust. Certain waiting period, is that right?
So I don't know.
You need to talk to your attorney because
Yes.
there's an option to transfer on that. And that's a pretty simple option there.
Yes.
I would assume the waiting period is probably,
I think they have to be in effect so long, the trust, if I'm correct.
you very well could be right.
I would check into that.
Yeah. Again, this is where having a great attorney. And I would say the other thing with the attorney and either the banker or your financial advisor, you got to be really comfortable with them. Okay. Because they need to know where all the skeletons are. Okay. Because if you don't tell them, that's when things get held up later on. Okay. Because when you die, right, really the point of an estate or a will is to make sure all your bills are paid at the end of the day and to pass on whatever's left over, if there's anything, depending on the situation, which most of you will have something to pass on. I was like, to whoever you choose, whether that's your heirs or a charity or whatever, right? So again, you gotta have a good attorney because you gotta trust them. They gotta trust you. And I've also been told it's a good idea to find an attorney that's around your age so they grow with you. Does that make sense? That's what I've heard. Yeah. So
Biggest thing is probably just the avoiding probate. It's like
Yeah.
a trust, just like that one
yeah, because then it's all private.
Then it was spelled out and there was
Yeah.
there was no arguing over it. It was very laid out and there's not to go through the probate thing and have a bunch of people fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Arguing over it.
I mean,
if you have minor children too, because you can put that in trust for them then.
yes.
There's
Nobody can touch it.
Yeah,
If you have a
there's a-
will and it just goes to whoever.
You
and
just
then
hope
they
for the
remarry,
best.
They can touch it. So if you have a trust, you can say when they turn 18 or when they turn 21 or when they get their act together and turn 50. they can access it.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
true.
you can do there's a lot of different vehicles within trusts.
That's the thing. And that's why I was like, I would highly encourage you to talk to an attorney because there are so many different kinds of trusts as well. So I was like,
Yeah.
they will know. I mean, again, this is where you got to be comfortable enough with them to talk to them because they got to know everything that's going on. And you're going to have to do updates every 3 to 5 years. So again, this is not a one and done situation necessarily, unless it's a critical issue. So, but yeah. So again, make sure those assets are transferred on death or before, because I have seen where trusts are set up and assets are not actually transferred and trusts are not set up properly. And I'm like, that's why I was like, get a good attorney. I was like, ask your neighbors, get recommendations, all of those things. So you can, again, and that's where you can do those pour overs. So,
The other thing I will say on attorneys, and part of this is a little bit of a play on my wife being one, but the other thing I would say about attorneys is over the last decade, I think that is a profession that has started specializing. And so don't just go to your local attorney and think that they can set things up like this. It's just like, I would not, if you got into some sort of criminal trouble, I would not tell you to go to my wife because she is not a criminal attorney. She is not going to be.
Right.
Or if I was getting a divorce, that's not the kind of law that he practices and specializes in. So there are good attorneys out there that specialize in
in
these
this,
things.
yeah, I would do either an estate or an elder law care. Just depends on your situation. So like thinking if it's your parents and there's some situation happening I'm not aware of, an elder law attorney can do some really amazing things.
Yeah.
But for sure, someone who's at least specialized in estate and transition is ideal. Yes, thank you. That was a good point. So, yeah, because there are some generalized attorneys out there, so, but.
Yeah.
And if you can find someone who does specifically ag estates, that's, I mean, which you find way more common out here. And the Nebraska bar actually has like, you can search your area out and find out who's specialized in that specific area, so. Again, bequests of property, that's where, have any of y'all heard of like grandma's yellow pie plate? Or 5 wishes? I know it sounds funny, doesn't it? So I was like, but basically, again, kind of a legally binding document. But like I said, my dad didn't speak to his sisters for 10 years because of a love seat. It's the little sentimental things that like people get upset over. So, and again, I assume you haven't experienced that because you're dealing more with the land side, but and I don't know how many people have had that happen. I was like, I know other people that it was a baby doll, right? That like upset everybody, or like a christening dress. Again, I've heard all kinds of
These
stuff.
kids all have grandpa's tractor.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Geez, yeah.
You know,
Especially the antique ones. Yeah. So again, that's why it's really important to have those written. And I told you, my grandma had it in her will. She was like, "Oh, everybody gets back what they bought me over the years." She was 83 when she passed. That's a lot of accumulation of things. I don't know about you, Samantha. I'm lucky if I remember what I had for breakfast this week, let alone what I bought my parents 2 decades ago. So I'm just, again, it's important to like, and I don't recommend this one either. Don't do the sticker thing. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? I was like, we're like,
sticker on there. Yeah.
those stickers change, okay? See, someone else has also experienced some of this.
My
Yes.
sister-in-law, she's got her initials on the back of all these pictures she wants. But she's the only sister left.
Is she?
So she gets them all.
But she gets them all.
But you know.
Yeah. So, well, sometimes that happens, but I was like, I've heard stories where like the stickers change, or like they'll do colored dots, like one for each of them. Let me tell you, those dots get swapped out. So again, so these are just kind of ideal steps. Your situation may be different, but ideally step 1, write down an inventory of what you have. So when I did this with my parents, again, God bless my dad. He's like, I don't really own anything. I said, you and mom have 120 acres of like farm and ranch ground in Florida. You're an hour and a half from the beach. You have 2 tractor sheds and 3 tractors. You have stuff, plus cows, plus the corrals, plus all the chutes. I was like, I started just looking around and listing things. He's like, oh, well, I guess I do have stuff. I said, you have a lot of stuff. I was like, you have a lot. Again, write down that inventory. And then again, this is ideal, but everybody's situation is different. So it may not happen in this order. Hopefully the family can meet. You get to decide who has input, by the way, if you're the decider of the group, basically. So who is in and who is out. If you just want it to be the kids and you don't want it to be the in-laws, you have that right to decide that. Or maybe you want it to be the kids and the grandkids, or you want it to be everybody. It's up to you. You decide who's meeting. Ideally, step 3, we have a plan. Here is what we are thinking. And then again, hopefully you have professionals to help put in the right tools in place. That's where an attorney, a banker, or your financial advisor come in handy. Accountant sometimes. Sometimes we need a mediator or therapist, depending on our families, right? So it just depends. We have a professional that helps put those right tools in place. We have a succession plan that's developed and signed. Yay! So we just have to remember every 3 to 5 years to review it periodically. And part of the reason we do that is, my God, we just had an accident. Samantha is, disabled now. Sorry, Samantha. I'm just going to keep picking on.
Okay.
I'm just saying, we didn't plan on that.
I know.
Mom and dad didn't plan on that when they were letting us like create our agreement, right? So, because life happens, we never know what's going to happen. So we don't plan on our parents getting sick. We don't plan on us getting sick, but it does happen. So that's why it's really important to review this, and maybe, we need to make some changes. So communication and empathy, listen. I heard a really awesome acronym. I don't know if it's an acronym. I think it's an acronym. We're going with it. It's called WAIT. WAIT. Has anybody else heard of this? I kind of loved it, but I also am a chatterbox, so that's why. And it's basically you ask in your head, why am I talking?
Oh, I've seen that before. Yeah.
I was like, this is a good one. So I try and employ this. Show empathy, show concern, right? Because we're having these deep, difficult discussions about what's going to potentially happen at end of life and what we want to happen, hopefully. Right? Because I don't know about you, but I want to be at home as long as humanly possible. If I have to get to the point where we got to go to assisted care living, we need to have that conversation. You're right. But again, have those upfront conversations. Show empathy, show concern, focus on the intent. And again, we're dealing with family. We love them so much, don't we? But they also are the ones that know how to push our buttons the most. So, am I the only one that has experience? I was like, that I'm like, yeah, 100%. They know how to push our buttons the best. If you have siblings, you know I'm telling you the truth. It's like, so again, emotion gets really high sometimes. So it's really important to sit and to listen as best we can. Try to get to the heart of the issue. I've worked with families that I know this is going to sound kind of wild, but those kids still argued and they were in their mid 40s about a baseball glove when they were like 10 or 12. Okay. So I was like, it's getting to the heart of what's going on. And when you don't feel you don't understand, and when the other person doesn't feel understood, oftentimes they'll act out. So some communication mistakes, asking a question not to find out what they will say, but to say what you wanted to say. Right? Making an assumption of what someone else is going to say. And I think this is, I don't know, I know I do this one.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about how we're going to respond while the other person is actually talking. Right? So we're talking to mom and dad about how we're going to plan everything for the future, how we kind of, and they're telling us how they want it to go. I'm already formulating my response while they're still talking.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I'm guilty of this one. I'm also guilty of this one. I have some of my my girlfriends I talk to, and I'm like, they'll just be telling me about what's going on, and they're like, stop trying to fix an issue. We're not asking you to. We just want you to listen and empathize. And I'm like, oh, okay, my bad. I was like, so again, this happens a lot again, especially because sometimes we're with families, so we love them and we want to help them, right? So we're still listening, but we're trying to fix the issue, and they're like, no, I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to listen to what I'm saying. Again, stress and succession planning. It is stressful. 54% of participants felt stress over how assets were divided. There's business risk. Again, that sibling harmony can be a big piece. Emotions, personal risk. And then treating assets strictly as inheritance and not as business assets, that can also happen. Again, like I said, especially if you have a farmer ranch, depending on your sibling. I hear this a lot from older producers I've worked with that inherited back in the 80s or 90s when ground wasn't worth a whole lot. They were like, you couldn't have paid my sibling to take my parents' land. They were happy to let it go. Nowadays, though, I've seen ground out west go for 8 to 10 grand an acre, which I think is insane. But even if you think of what it cost a decade or decade and a half ago, right? It was a completely different price to what it is nowadays. So unfortunately, greed will bring out, money brings out the green-eyed monster in a lot of folks. So again, and you have a lot of people that sometimes think they're entitled to things, even though mom and dad are the ones that earned it and bought it, right? So in some cases, the tension can be so great that the owner generation avoids making decisions. I've also seen this one. I've met a lot of people that they're like, when I'm dead and gone, I don't care. My kids will figure it out. That's literally what they said. So I was like, okay, I can't make a decision for you. So, but I was like, if they're not getting along now, when you're gone, they're going to really not get along. There is very little chance of Christmas and Thanksgiving being together. So here are some other assumptions. I've actually had people tell me this one. The kids all get along great now. They'll be fine when I'm gone. So I was like, that is not always the case. This is again the other one. Land used to not be worth a whole lot. Now it's worth a whole lot. I know that my kids are going to want to keep this asset in the family even when we are gone. Yeah. Again, let's say we're siblings. I'm off farm. Let's pretend I don't know, a dentist or something. I was like, I don't know what I do, but I do something else. I was like, mom and dad pass away. They left it 50-50. Yeah. You shake your head because you know, right? Do you know where this is going? 50. Samantha. I know they left us this like quarter ground, but I really want a Ferrari. I've always wanted a Ferrari. I don't know. I'm making it up. I drive a Kia, y'all. But I'm just saying, I was like, it sounds crazy, but it does happen. I was like, and I'm like, also, I think you should just buy me off because you've been farming it already for like 20 years. I thought I was disabled. Well, you're not now. You're undisabled now.
Okay, I got better.
You got better. And I was like, and I'm no longer on the operation, and you've been doing it for 20 years. But they left it 50-50. That happens a lot, y'all.
Buy-sell agreement.
Buy-sell agreement is an option. Yes. But I'm like, with the cost of ground, again, I want that Ferrari today. I was like, and I don't know how much they are. Let's say they're $200,000. Do you got that in the bank? I don't got that in the bank. I don't have that. So again, we don't think about these things happening, but they do.
What's the buy-sell agreement? What would we do?
Oh, a buy-sell agreement is like,
because with land prices today.
Correct.
How does the
They're-
sibling buy out a sibling?
I know. Buy-sell agreements are good options if they're willing to agree. However, here's what I'm going to tell you this, and I think hopefully your wife would agree. Make sure that you have wording in there that it's binding upon death. Because again, we don't think anything's going to happen to me, but maybe I have 3 kids they each want a Ferrari. Oh, no. Not just one now. We're looking at 3. And I tragically perish. And we have a buy-sell agreement, which is, let's say, generally buy-sell agreements, you can do 15 to 30 year, kind of like a mortgage, but it's person to person a lot of times. So again, let's say we have a buy-sell agreement because you're my sister and I want that Ferrari. But you know what? I could wait. I can save for it, from your money that you're going to pay me to buy this land out. But we don't have it binding on heirs. I've had that happen before. I've gotten those phone calls. It's not binding on heirs. Or even worse, they have buy-sell agreements that are like handshake deals, I know. And again, nobody else knew about it. But my God, you'd already been paying me for 5 years. So that's where, again, making sure some of those are great options to have potentially, but make sure it's binding on heirs.
My wife's grandpa passed away this past year, and they own some farm ground down in Morgan County, Colorado. And he wrote in his will that there's 9 kids, and he wrote in his will that the farm would be valued at, I think it was $5 million.
You can do that too,
that's
yeah.
About $3 to $4 million under probably fair market value. But there's one of the kids that's still on the farm and a grandson still on the farm. And so he knew that basically if they were to do fair market value, there was no way that those 2 would be able to come up with the funds to buy out the other 8 siblings. So he wrote it in his will that the property
is valued
would
at
be
X
valued at X amount of dollars.
Yeah.
And then that way they knew that they could come up with those kind of.
There's a lot of
And then there's a
options.
certain amount to.
I don't know if it was written. I mean, they all basically, the son that was still farming, in that situation, he just went to the bank and pulled out a loan and turned around.
That's
and
good.
bought
He
all
was
the
able to
siblings
do
out.
that.
And so he didn't like own or finance or carry any of them in that situation. Right. I'm sure in that situation you could write in if you wanted to like own or carry or finance them. But
I've also seen where it was priced at tax valuation,
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
which is, what, 70.
That's probably
2% or
70%. That's probably about where that's probably about where they were at.
Yeah.
The assessed value.
And it makes it a lot easier to get a loan that way for it, so.
Right.
Yeah, because then there's some equity.
Yes.
Hmm.
So, and well, I was gonna say, the people I know that something similar like that happened, they kind of saw the writing on the wall, so they were able to save up. I mean, they saved a considerable 6-digit amount to put down as well as be able to, yeah.
And I would say that's a very rare situation too, because to have 9 people
Yeah, that's a lot.
all agree that they were comfortable carrying out
Yeah.
dad's wishes. I mean, that doesn't always happen, right? So I mean,
No.
they all went along with it, but I mean, it could have gone the other way very quickly, but it was written that way in the will.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things where having some conversations up front can be very helpful and continuing those conversations. So, this one again, I see this one all the time. They want to just split everything evenly. So their assets are going to be divided 25% equally. That'll be like we got to split 50-50. I still wanted my Ferrari. So again, for the on-farm person, they're like, mom or dad are like, someday this is gonna all be yours.
Equal is not fair, and fair is not equal.
Exactly. Equal is not fair and fair is not equal. Look at you go. You're ahead of the PowerPoint. I was like, so again, 25, 25, 25, 25 is the most common, right? Again, 50-50, most common, lowest success rate. I was like, most operations or families employing the strategy normally don't continue to the next generation. Also, statistically, you're lucky if it makes it beyond the third. So I was like, anybody in here like third, fourth, fifth generation? I figured a lot of y'all might be. I was like, again, that's actually like a pretty rare occurrence. People don't realize. Sweat Equity, Anastasia Meyer, who is located southeast Nebraska, she does a lot of work on this and in this area in terms of transition planning. So it's basically how can a retiring farmer and returning heir set up an agreement to ensure that the heir's unpaid efforts are going to be compensated when the family farm transitions. This study basically looked at 3 different profitable farms in sweat equity. A strategy such as this can potentially ensure an additional way to, again, transition this. And again, Anastasia did some of her graduate work at KSU on it. So, but you okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just going somewhere else.
Oh, okay. So in this example, each farm had a 12-year transition plan to retire at 70. The heir had children and a spouse who worked in town. The heir quit their full-time job to come back. So this used Kansas Farm Management Association to model these farms. So we're looking at a dairy farm, a crop farm, and then a beef operation. So here are the 3 different agreements we're looking at. A percentage agreement. The owner starts with 75% income and expenses, and then after 12 years, that's reduced. Now that's gradually over time, right? So again, let's pretend, Samantha, that I'm now your mother. So I own this, and we're going to create an agreement on the percentage, right? So I'm going to say, you know what? Most of my stuff is almost paid off, but I got about 10 years before everything's really paid off. So let's do a tapered agreement. So I'll get 75% of the income and expenses starting. And then after 12 years, that'll transition over and be reduced. I'll continue for the rest of my life to receive 25%, right? No matter what, because bills got to be paid. So again, having that discussion, those agreements. Salary agreement is just to offer compensation comparable to the off-farm job. Sometimes you can also offer additional cash or assets with this one. And then the hourly agreement is kind of management like percentage, but paid on hours. So rather than a salary, dedicated to operating using that KFMA hourly wages. So percentage agreement was overall the most successful out of the 3 when it was used in the simulation. When the farm was successful, both the heir and the owner generation saw success. So over that 12 years, as we handed things over to you, Samantha, including the expenses and income, right? You were a heck of a manager. I mean, you really took us to the moon, let's say. So you did a great job. Now we're earning even more money. So even though I'm at 25%, I'm still technically, at a great income. All my bills are paid off. So I'm what's called self-insured. That means my house is paid for. My vehicle's paid for, all my equipment and land are paid for. I'm just paying taxes and insurance basically, and any upkeep on that house because they cost a lot of money. I was like, but so that's transitioned over. Again, that's best case scenario. Now, when the operation was successful, everybody won basically. So you can kind of look at these and see the differences. But that percentage is typically better than the salary. Again, this is just over time. And then the hourly was kind of the least successful out of the two. So you guys doing okay? Powering through? Okay. All right. So there are a lot of ways to reduce those taxes, kind of like you talked about upon one's death. This is where it's really important to talk to your accountant or your bookkeeper, your legal person, have those discussions. So this is an example. This is the current, this is the current single estate tax. So exemption for 2026. If you're married, it's 27.2 million. If you're single, it's actually a little under 14, or a little under 15. But so again, if you're single and your estate is worth more than $15 million, I am so excited for you. It's like, but also, again, that's our federal annual exemption, not the states, by the way. The state is very different than the federal, but most people are within that $15 million range. And if we're a couple, we're a husband and a wife, right? We're married. We did this together. I was like, we're looking at 27.2 mil. So again, the annual exemption for the federal gift tax is $19,000 a person in 2025. I don't know what it's going to be this year. It's going to probably be 20 or 22. It generally also goes up along with the, oh my God, the threshold of the federal tax exemption. Me and words today. But you can find out, the IRS has a website that has all that information about the different gift taxes as well as the federal estate exemptions. So, capital gain tax. So when somebody dies, the stepped up basis is a tax provision that allows the value of an inherited asset to be adjusted to its fair market value at the time of the original owner's death. So what that means is, Samantha, I'm your mom again.
Okay.
I'm going to die this time.
Oh, no.
Okay, I know. I'm sorry. I don't know why. So I died and I left you the farm. Okay. So when I bought it, I paid $700 an acre for it, let's say. Now it's worth $4,000. So you have the option to take that step up in basis, right? Now that does affect your taxes, but it also allows for you to, if you want to make potential improvements, right, borrow against it. Because you got that, I already paid that land off years ago. So again, it depends on your situation. Now, that being said, when you do your estate and transition plan, there are ways to hold that basis steady, depending on how that's transitioned over sometimes. So again, we're talking to an attorney who specializes in estate and transition planning, can be good, because sometimes people don't want that stepped up basis for their kids, because if they decide to sell it, they're less likely to sell it if they don't take the step up in basis, because they're hanging on to that, because there's a huge capital gains tax. So again, the tax rate is dependent on income and the length of ownership, short-term versus long-term. So again, at someone's death, it may be important to begin collecting price data on these items. And that's their actual date of death. So an appraiser can be really handy in these situations if you decide to take a step up or not. So it can be really difficult to find this information if it's like years after the fact or months. So again, so how are assets actually owned? This is a big one. So assets may not qualify for the stepped up in basis, depending on, it's got to be included in the estate to actually qualify. Spouses can be eligible for the stepped up basis. Grain, livestock, machinery, and land, but also for prepaid assets on hand. So think if you prepaid fertilizer, you bought fertilizer in November, December, you died in like January. Unfortunately, that's a prepaid expense or a prepaid asset at that point. So it could potentially, again, qualify. So, like I said, mom bought farmland in 1970 for $500 an acre, right? Mom passed away and it's $7,000 an acre. The heirs received the stepped up basis because, you know, they were able to get that. They sold the land, their capital gains price. Again, they have to take that. Now, if mom needs money, because we got to put her in assisted living because we can't take care of her. She can't do her ADLs, right? And we got to make sure she's got the care she needs. So we decide to sell the land. She's still got the original basis, right? So she doesn't have to pay nearly as much in capital gains, basically, is what happens. She's paying it on the $500 she paid back in 1970. So again, and depending on the situation and how it's set up, I've seen trusts set up where they are able to keep the old basis. And again, that's because if to discourage the heirs from selling is what I've heard it's used for. Because then they're hit with a large capital gains once it's transitioned over. Nebraska is one of the 5 states that does have an actual inheritance tax. So again, another reason to really plan because the government's going to get theirs one way or the other. It's paid to the county where the property is located if it's a physical asset. The cash is generally split if the residence is elsewhere. If the property is transferred to a surviving spouse or anyone under the age of 22, there are some exceptions. So again, I would say if you're really curious, you can go to the website.
We need to lobby your state senators about the inheritance.
That's true, but okay, I have
It
been,
comes up almost every.
I know it does, but I have also been told that it's highly unlikely that will happen because they must get a good amount from that. No, but dollar wise, it must be a good amount. So, because I know a lot of counties would not be really happy if that went away because that goes into, I believe, the county coffers. So,
Stays in the county.
so that's my understanding is why it's,
It's 1% to immediate family, right?
yes.
And then, yeah, there you go.
There you go. So, yeah. So, like, if you're someone who, like, I myself do not have children, but I have nieces and nephews that I helped raise. So, for me, I was like, again, and you're only exempt up to $100,000. A tractor nowadays costs way more than that. So, you're going to be paying that 1% at this point, unless you could lobby, like you said. So, but yeah. And then if you do friends, non-related individuals, they're taxed at the 15% rate and it's exempt up to 25,000, which again, I mean, even if it's close relatives, like it's your kids or your mom or a sibling or whatever, $100,000. I don't want to be like $100,000 is nothing because it's a lot of money. But when we're looking at a business, it goes quick is what I would say. That exemption is eaten up pretty quick. So this is the 1031 tax exchange. And I knew a couple of y'all had raised your hand and said that you had heard about this. So it basically provides an exception and allows you to postpone paying tax on the gain if you reinvest the proceeds in similar property as part of a qualifying like-kind exchange. I hear this happening a lot. Several years ago, like people would sell off their land in Colorado outside of Denver, make some money, and immediately buy property here. You're shaking your head, yes. Yeah.
It still happens a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. The biggest thing is you have 100.
It's a time limit. Yeah.
180 days, and then within 45 days of the sale, I think it's within 45 days of the sale of your property, you have to have
Something lined up.
3 properties you're interested in. So there's a time frame to make it work.
Yes.
And yeah, but it does get, we deal with it quite a bit.
Yeah. So again, this is one that a lot of people are interested in and or have utilized over the years. At some point, the gain can be tax deferred, but it is not tax free. Both properties have to be similar enough to qualify as, again, that like mind. I don't know how you determine that. That's that's why you get people that are realtors and real estate people to help you figure all that out, and attorneys. So Again, the simplest is the simultaneous swap of one property for another. I know a lot of people that had farms and ranches in Colorado. I've heard sold and then came over here and bought farms and ranches. So, here you go. The 45 days from the date you sell that property, you got to ID the potential replacements. Purchase agreement in writing between you and the seller. You got 180 days to make it actually happen. You have to have that sale completed. And again, the IRS has whole publications devoted to this. And that one, if there are any changes to it, they usually update that when it's available. But I don't think they've updated that. I think it's pretty much stayed the same for the last few years, hasn't it?
Yeah,
As far as I know. So Nebraska Land Link is a program in Nebraska that is, I kind of look at it like Match.com, quite frankly, for farmers and potential heirs. So basically what it is it's connecting landowners with land seekers. So you each kind of fill out a questionnaire on what you're interested in, what you're looking for in a land seeker, and then you're matched according to that, and also location. Usually location is included in that. So some potential tax credits, which are always great. LB 34 started in 2024. Basically, it removed the school district property tax credit from the income tax returns and placed it directly on the property tax statement. So it's automatically done, is my understanding. However, the community college property taxes, you still have to make sure you're including that. So this is my understanding, is where you used to have to tick a box, you no longer have to tick a box. It's automatically included in your tax statement when you get it. However, the community college, you still have to make sure that is calculated out. So that's kind of the difference. So if you want